Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Behind the Screen. I am JM, and we are going to be talking about horror today. A topic very close to my heart. As most of my gamers and my friends know, I have a lot of love of the genre horror for a number of reasons that we may get into here. But in case this is your first time tuning in, this is Behind the Screen. I am JM. I run games on the Iconic Production channel. I am a published game designer and author, and I am this is just a show where we take the screen down, we sit, we talk, we have some coffee. I hope you have your coffee or your warm beverage, morning beverage of choice, and we just talk about game design, GMing, philosophy, book reviews, game reviews, just whatever just happens to seem interesting to all of us at a time. And yes, Ben, we are talking about the unreliable narrator. So this idea came to me a long ago as I was reading through Gene Wolfe's great series, The Books of the New Sun. Severian tells you right off the bat two things about himself. One, he has an eidetic memory. And two, he's not sure he can trust his eidetic memory. And so through the whole book, you're not entirely sure if what he is remembering is true, if he's lying to you. There's an unreliable narrator element of this. And as I got into gaming, what was fascinating about me is the GM acts as the player's doorway to the world. The players look, ask questions. The players look to the GM to describe what is going on. All of the senses that the player characters have in the game come through.
Sorry, could you say that again? Sorry.
Apologies. Gotta learn to take this off when I come into the studio. Hide that. All come out of the mouth of the GM. And there's sort of this implicit trust that the GM is always going to tell you the truth. If you ask a question of the GM, what does my character see? What does my character hear? What does this thing feel like? What does it taste like? What smells are in the air? What does the creature look like? Or when the GM is giving you a narration, setting the scene for you, that the GM is being 100% honest with you. And I think 99% of the time that is important. The GM's job is to create the scene, create a sense of verisimilitude that creates the world and brings it to life. But the problem with that is, what that leads to in horror games is that leads to what I will call the shock factor. You can gross somebody out with a description. You can shock someone with a description. But you can't really bring to life that sense of tension and horror. And so I tried this out in a Fading Suns game. You can go back and watch it on the YouTube channel. But essentially, I lied to my players a lot. And I won't say I outright lied, but I described something to them only when they got close to realize it wasn't what they thought. They were exploring an abandoned base on an asteroid that they knew had been infiltrated by antinomists, those who are against the name of the Pan Creator, demon worshippers, that sort of thing. And I set the scene, the lights were flickering, they couldn't see very far, there were always things on the walls, strange sounds. And what we discovered was, as we went through, the more that the players were asking questions, and the more that the scenario, or I was purposefully misleading them in their interpretations of the senses, the more the tension ramped up. So, for example, the first time they saw a cultist sort of looming over this broken control panel, robes billowing sort of ominously as if there was an ill wind in the control room, they got really scared. They moved tactically to get close, and then discovered it was just a robe that had been draped over a cape or a chair. The fact that sometimes their characters felt sensations that turned out to not be there, or saw something on the wall out of the corner of their eyes. So I'm not talking about like, is this the bad guy? No, mwahaha. I'm talking about using your descriptions in a deceptive manner. That can create tension, and that can create horror in a situation. Lovecraft does this. Barker does this. Very rarely do they come out and give you all of the information in the scene. They let your mind build out spaces around them. So Ben says that I should limit my number of lies. And I would say typically yes. Bob, thank you for the cheer. Good to see you as well. But I would say in a horror game, the fear of the unknown and the fear of the uncertain is where that sensation of dread comes from, right? It's like the horror movie adage: never show the monster clearly. As soon as you show the monster clearly, the tension is gone. Think back to Alien. For me, one of the seminal works of horror that is still scary to this day. You never get a clear view of the full-grown xenomorph until the end. You get the shock of the xenomorph popping out of the guy's chest, but it always cuts away. You get brief glimpses that the director, Ridley Scott, never allows you to clearly see the alien. When you see it in the ship, it's always hidden behind shadows or steam or behind the pipes, and it's not until that very final scene. Right, there's even the part where they are tracking the alien through the ship, and it turns out to be a cat. Tension breaks, but then the realization dawns and the tension rebuilds. It's not until that final scene on the shuttle when the alien just sort of unfolds itself from this control area on the shuttle that we fully get to see the alien. But again, the tension has been built to a hum. They've pulled our nerves so tightly that we're ready to see the monster. A Quiet Place is a great movie, but you see the monster pretty early on. For me, that destroys a lot of the movie magic. We got a lot going on in Restart. Yes, or in chat. Yes, Restart. Tricks aren't lies, but here's the thing: there is an implicit expectation that the GM is always telling you exactly what's going on in the situation. So I would argue that tricks are deceptive. Tricks are lies. You are purposefully twisting the information you are giving. Now, this doesn't work in all games, right? There are points in F20 games like D&D where this is appropriate. I think this really works well in games like Call of Cthulhu, in games like Cult, in games like World of Darkness games, where there is, again, this implicit understanding that we're here to share in a scary story to a degree. Let's see what else we've got. Yes, Pennywise stops being scary as soon as you really see him. Or, if you're watching the new It, as soon as the town bully shows up and tries to carve letters into the kids. If your giant fear monster is not as scary as your bully, I think you've done something wrong. Just, that's my personal opinion. But it's also, I think, why horror tends to work better for me in books than it does in movies, because my brain is picking up on those cues and allowing itself to be scared. House of Leaves is by far the scariest book I've ever read, and it works this way. Like, the unreliable narration of all three narrators is sort of key to that. Let's see what else we've got here. Oh, Cloverfield, Lovecraft Up Until the Mountains of Madness. How do you know when to actually show them the monster? That's a good question, Ben. So again, like in D&D, few monsters work this way. Or in Pathfinder. I think Pathfinder has a deeper breadth of actual truly horrific monsters. And D&D, I think things like the illithid can really be, the mind flayer can be a really good source of horror. I would say typically I don't make the reveal. I'm trying to make the reveal as late as possible in the adventure, because when you get to, once you reveal the monster, and typically in a game, once you reveal the monster, the combat dice come out. You want to have that as far out as you can. I just got this great new adventure for Pathfinder 2. I think it's called Shadows at Sundown. It just came out, and there's this creepy giant bloody spider thing, um, but it can compress itself into the same size as a medium sized creature could go through. So again, I would probably use that, letting you just catch glimpses of this sanguine, wet shadow sliding, or scramble. Something rushes you in the darkness and scrambles and is trying to like squeeze itself into the tunnel that you're running at. Yeah, I would agree, Bob. House of Leaves is insane, um, bizarre, but yeah, I would say the longer you can push it, the higher the tension ramps. I mean, that's the problem with even Call of Cthulhu, right? There's two types of Call of Cthulhu monsters: the ones you fight and the ones that insta kill you. But as soon as you throw out the dice, I think that's when the tension truly breaks. And then you have to rely on things like body horror, shock factor, or just sheer gruesomeness to maintain any sort of horrific nature. Um, like, take the Fading Suns episode. As soon as they encountered Azazel, I think that's when the tension kind of fell apart. So how did this affect the nightmare that I made in the Torg game? It's a good question. I don't know that the Torg monster the nightmare was actually that scary. I am trying something new with the nightmare that is chasing the Fet 5 group. And I'm letting the legend kind of build in the background. We're gonna talk more about that actually on Tuesday when the legend shows back up. The slasher, but again, even slasher films, right? You see the slasher and then they disappear. Um, Michael Myers is a perfect example of this. It's slow, it's relentless, but again, slasher films really lean more into the idea of, I don't want to say horror. I think slasher films are more of, they more tap into kind of the unrelenting march towards death, almost a memento mori kind of thing, right? You can never really truly escape the slasher. Yeah, they may have jump scares, but really for me, the scariest part of the slasher film is that one where the victim is struggling to get away, and no matter how fast they run, no matter what they do, the slasher is relentless in their pursuit of their victim, much like death is relentless against all of us. So, follow-up question from Ben Feehan. Uh, how do you make sure it actually pays off? Is that's just an inherent risk of the genre? I think it is. I think it's a inherent risk of horror, because a horror game to me is far harder to run than most genres of game, because you have to have even more player buy-in. A bad joke at the wrong time can break the tension and the mood. Um, but again, we all, you know, there's always this risk of the tension breaking at the wrong point, or the payoff not being as great. And I think to mitigate that, one, keep it building as long as possible. And then two, even in the combat, do your best to obfuscate what the creature is doing. If it's orcs, if you're using the dream orcs that are coming out in the new, slight spoiler, no, it's out in PDF. The Drakkenhall book that Corey put together, the terror orcs. even in shadows, like if you're not really describing what the monster is, but sort of the effects it's having on its environment, if you're letting the shadows cling to them, if you're letting the uncertainty of where they're at, you can build mechanics around this. Maybe we need to build mechanics around this. But go back and look at the Kashaptu that we built. The idea that the Kashaptu, every time it attacks you, is stealing a little bit of yourself. Suddenly, the players are not just worried about inflicting damage, but how to mitigate their own, and that adds tension to the fight. It's an interesting challenge, and I think that's why when you look at the breadth of games that we have right now, far more of them are heroic fantasy than horror. There's a couple of really great horror games. There's a couple of ones that dabble in things that I just don't feel comfortable dabbling. Cult is one of them. Cult has uh, some truly real darkness built into that game world. But like Unknown Armies, I'm not a big fan of because of I think it's a very accurate look at um, the mental toll of delusion, and that one's really hard for me. Think about most World of Darkness games. They have horror implicit in them, but like Vampire seem to always degenerate into superheroes of the night who just happen to feed on human blood, but only the blood of those who deserved it. Werewolf strays away from horror into again almost super heroics. I think Call of Cthulhu does its best to cling to the horror roots. Mage, if run well, can be horrific because it's so much more personal, right? There's really two types of horror. We're talking there's cosmic horror, which is the universe hates you and you are eventually going to break down and die, or personal horror. And I think personal horror is almost easier to do. Do I think that? That's a tough one. Yes, Padre. And in fact, Ben was having a really interesting discussion about this earlier. The idea that there's nothing really that we can't overcome with shield or sword or bow or bomb. And horror is maybe that's why it's tougher to sell horror kind of in this area. The idea that we do have this innate cultural understanding that we are up to any task. And I think that's one of the things Lovecraft is pushing against, that no, we're not. Yeah. Hey, Praetorian, good to see you, buddy. Um, so yeah, I think the Unreliable Narrator is possibly one of the most underutilized and great ways to establish that tension. Horror requires tension, and I'm not saying you can't make jokes, because let's be honest, jokes are sort of the most natural thing to make in dark situations, right? We talked about this on the Iconic podcast. Mark said, hey, gallows humor and military humor are a real thing because when you're facing death a lot, humor is used to lighten the tension. But I think there's a difference between making a joke in character and dropping a Monty Python quote. And I think players have to be willing to, one, buy into the unreliable narrator, and two, have to be willing to sit with the tension. And not everyone's willing to sit with tension. Tension can make us uncomfortable. I think of the British Office. The tension in that show was so awkward. It was very uncomfortable to sit with and watch. But I think if you got the right group, or you have the right scenario, again, I think orcs can be terrifying if done right. I mean, imagine, if you will, if instead of orcs defending a tomb, we're hunting the players through the tomb. Maybe using it as a lure or as a trap. And you don't really see the orcs. You catch a glimpse through broken mosaics on the wall. You catch things moving. You can hear the sound of their falls and the scrape of their armor just on the other side of the wall as the players are going deeper and deeper into this tomb because they need to recover something. You can hear, right in Moria, they don't see things first. They hear the drums in the deep. The more things you can shuffle to off screen, and the more times you can give them a glimpse of something that turns out to be a glimpse of nothing, you just start building this Jenga tower of tension that will eventually, collapse and fall down. Body horror and those dead Polar Express eyes, Ben, that was great. I freaking loved that whole Uncanny Valley scene from that movie. So hopefully this has been helpful. Hopefully this is will be useful to you in your games if you're looking at running horror or interjecting a little bit of tension and horror into your games. If you liked what I said, leave a comment. If you think I'm way off, leave a comment in the YouTube comments, and I will be sure to respond to them. Thank you to everyone to show up for the chat. As always, it's always good to have people to interact with and talk about. We have a lot going on the Iconic Production channel. You can check out all of the other great shows. We have this Monday and Tuesday, we have our actual plays, the second episode of our Deadlands Horror at Headstone Hill, a horror game that I will be leaning into at various points. And the Torg Eternity game where the group is heading into Tharcold. So this is a timely episode for me as I've been thinking about horror going into Tharcold and Deadlands. We'll be back with more behind the screens next week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We're going to be talking about, I'm going to have Restar on Thursday. We're going to talk about Torg and Torg characters and possibly the clearance levels and how that affects characters, and maybe show off some of the perks that exist at higher clearance levels so that you know kind of what's available, because they're not available at the start of the game. It's going to be a lot of fun. Looking forward to chatting with you, Ben, on Thursday. And on Tuesday, I'm going to talk something. We talked about how when combat hits, that tends to be when the tension breaks down. In this case, we're going to talk about making combats interesting. At least ways that I use to make combat interesting. And I kind of refer to the 3 T's. I always have 3 T's written on my page when I'm trying to look at a combat. And it's what's the terrain, what if any are there timers on the combat, and what are the tactics that I'm going to use. And I tend to feel like these 3 things really can make combat super interesting and fun and more dynamic than just a static my side goes, your side goes kind of a thing. Next Saturday and Sunday, we have a lot. We have 2 of our monthly shows. We're going to be talking about the Exploring Glorantha. We're going to be starting our tour of the spatial areas of play, starting with the Kingdom of Sartar. And then on Sunday night at 8 p.m. Central Time, Becca will be running our live actual play of Trail of Cthulhu with several of our patrons. So I hope that you guys are having a wonderful day and have a good weekend. I will see you all on Tuesday for more behind the screens. I will be posting pictures to our Discord channel. If you're not a member of the Iconic Patronage, jump over to patreon.com/Iconic Production. I am going out to a convention about Conan and Robert E. Howard with Ben, who plays Kowalski tomorrow. We're going out there because our good friend Gabe is going to be giving a paper, and so we'll be taking it. The theme is Howard and gaming, so be sure to check out some of the pictures I'm posting both on the Discord channel and on our official Instagram page. You can find that in the show notes below. So until next week, stay safe, stay healthy, stay gaming. It's good to talk with all of you. Thank you all for showing up for this episode of Behind the Screen, and I'll see you all next week. Have a good one.